Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Zag's APUSH. Our previous videos have detailed Period 3 and began Period 4, Jefferson through Monroe and the Era of Good Feeling. This video, we are going to continue with our AP time Period 4 and the Era of Good Feeling coming to an end, and we're going to be targeting the rise of the common man. So sit back, get out your Ticonderoga and your notebook, and let's get ready to rock and roll. Okay, so what we're looking at here is really the rise of the common man. We're looking at how the democratization of America is going to start to happen. And what we need to look at here again is the end of the War of 1812, the rise of nationalism that's going to be coming about in the nation, and America, looking at America through the lens of Henry Clay and his American system, and America expanding west and building upon that. We're also going to have to look at here the Panic of 1819, really a recession that came about as a result of wide land speculation at the end of the War of 1812, really as a result of farmers moving out west. And we know that if the farmers are having economic difficulties, that's pretty much a guarantee to some extent that there's going to be some sort of economic issues rising for all sectors of the American populace. And in 1819, what we're going to see here is that these farmers are going to start to push for more participatory actions in government as a result of, they feel that the Eastern establishment, those big wigs that are in the East, that very old guard is not really looking out for their best interests. And they're going to want to have a say, have a stronger say in the political arena. We've looked at, and what we need to look at here is the two paintings of how America is changing. You have the Trumbull painting of the Declaration of Independence, the very traditional, very British, very old guard looking, secretive, dark, wealthy, white, established men that are running the country. Transition that into the 1820s in the rendition by Bingham, and you're going to see the county election painting and how they differ in the sense of it's more open, government is more transparent, it's more of a informal event that has all walks of life, albeit still only white, still only males, but now you're going to start to see that different demographics, different classes of white males are going to be franchised into the American political arena. So we're going to see the rise of the common man as a result of economic hardships at the end of the War of 1812, and that's going to be influencing now the political side of this time period. What we're going to have here is that by the election of 1824, you're going to have states now transitioning to universal white male suffrage. And even if they don't have universal white male suffrage, most states during this time period, if not all states during this time period, are going to be a lot more lenient on who can vote. And most are going to get rid of the requirement of having to own land and land ownership as a prerequisite to have voting. That being said, you're going to see an extremely large voting pool, and we're going to see voter turnout really start to expand during this time period. And clearly that's going to be a transition to the candidates who are now still, as always before, rich, white, wealthy males still being in the political spectrum. But now they're going to have to appeal to the more common folk, especially those common folks that are living in the deeper South, in west of the Appalachian Mountains, and then out into the west in Kentucky and Illinois and states in the Trans-Mississippi region of the United States. And it's those people that are really, most of the populace of America is the common folk. And now candidates are going to have to transition that. You're going to see the rise of the third parties. You're going to see different types of campaigning with parades and more speeches giving. The rise of newspapers is going to explode during this era. And that's going to lead into the election of 1824. And what we're going to see is the election of 1824 And this is still the era of good feeling. So the political partisanship is at a low point. And after the election of 1824, that's going to expand and really just crumble, and we're going to see the rise of back into the two-party system. But the election of 1824 is going to really become between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. Henry Clay's in the mix, Crawford's in the mix, but it's really between Jackson and John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams. What happens is that Jackson wins the popular vote, Jackson wins the electoral vote, but he does not have a majority in the Electoral College to claim victory. So where does it go to? It gets thrown to the House of Representatives. And in the House of Representatives, basically Henry Clay, who's the Speaker of the House at the time period, and John Quincy Adams are going to make historians do argue that they have no proof that any wrongdoing was done, but hush, hush, there was probably some chatter in there to make sure that Jackson doesn't get the presidency. And as history goes, as the myth, the lore, whatever you want to call it goes, is that John Quincy says to Henry Clay that if you get me in, then you could become Secretary of State. And if at that moment in history, that time period, Secretary of State was a stepping stone to the presidency. So 1824, wouldn't you know it, the election in the vote in the House of Representatives goes to John Quincy Adams, and he becomes the president of the United States. And of course, Jackson being Jackson, what you got to think about with Jackson, he's the war hero. Okay, he's born in the West, so he's a Western. He's a war hero of the War of 1812. He was orphaned. He was had a tough upbringing, and he's going to be just absolutely irate about this, what he's going to call a corrupt bargain. And at that moment in time, he already starts the campaign for the 1828 election. And what his team is doing is basically using his war background, using his humble beginnings, his common man beginnings, and that's the voting group that he's going to make sure that he gets in the 1828 election. That's the voting group that he wants to appeal to. He wants to be the advocate for the common man. And that brings us to the election of 1828. And his strategy works. He wins in a landslide election of 1828, and he becomes president of the United States. And again, to the victors belongs the spoils. The spoils system is nothing new in history, and Jackson, is awarding governmental jobs to his supporters because he feels that it shouldn't be legacy. It shouldn't be the Washington insiders, so to speak, that are getting the government jobs. It should be new people. It should be common people that are getting these types of government jobs. And again, he's advocating for the common man. And what we're going to see is the question here, the Hamilton and Jefferson debates of the 1790s and even throughout the early part of the 19th century with Clay's American system, those debates are still going to be very relevant during the Jackson administration. And for the most part, Jackson is an advocate for states' rights. Okay, so the fundamental questions of constitutionality of different acts and different laws by Congress and the states are in question, as well as states' rights. Who has the power? Does the power lie? Is it sovereign to the federal government? Is it sovereign to the people? Is it sovereign to the states? And those are all difficult questions. They're almost rhetorical questions that are going to be asked indefinitely. So with Jackson, you're starting to see by 1832, 1833, you have the Nullification Crisis under Jackson's watch. And that's going to be where John C. Calhoun, who ironically is also Jackson's vice president, is really getting agitated, and he's the Southern voice. He's the voice of the pro-slavery South, the voice of South Carolina, and the South is clamoring over these protective tariffs. And Jackson doesn't like the tariff. He doesn't hate the tariff. It's just there and it goes through. But what we're going to see is that the South cannot stand these tariffs because they feel that it's hindering on their economic democracy to purchase the cheap linens from Europe, and they feel like by them spending more money on these tariffs that the money is just going to the North and protecting Northern industry, who they feel that the government is siding with at all times. So John C. Calhoun is clamoring for nullification, canceling out, nullifying Constitution acts by Congress. He's getting to the point where he's threatening secession as well. So Jackson comes out with probably one of his most impactful speeches and his pitch to Congress on nullification, and his answer to Calhoun, which is a very fatherly advice. That's that document where he really connects with the people, and he's showing these South Carolinians that he is one of them. He's a Southerner. He's a slave owner. Okay, he's the common man that came, the rags to riches story type of thing. Very Hamilton-like in that sense. And he's really promoting the Union here, and he stops secession. He stops the Civil War from happening 30 years prior than it did. So he holds off, and he sets the precedent, basically, that it's unconstitutional for states to secede the Union. Also, we're going to see during his presidency, that's where Jackson sides with nullification with the Union. But for the most part, he's going to be looking at siding with the states' rights advocates. And we're going to see that most notably during the Bank Wars. And the Bank Wars is where Jackson feels by 1833, and there's a lot of drama going on with the Bank Wars. It's vendettas, it's insider bickering between Henry Clay, who's promoting these banks, who's promoting the tariffs, because it's still part of Clay's American system. It's part of Clay's infrastructure, and it's got a Hamilton chorus to it. That's what Clay has during this time period, a very Hamilton chorus. And Jackson is got a very Jeffersonian voice to it. And that's where we're going to see that this Republican Party during the era of good feeling is going to split. And you're going to have Clay and John Quincy really becoming these national Republicans, and then they're going to become the Whigs, and then by the 1850s that becomes the Republican Party. But again, almost like a revitalizing the Federalist Party of the 1790s and into the turn of the 19th century. And then Jackson's going to take the road of the Democrat Party. That's going to be a la very Jeffersonian, very really looking out for the common man, looking out for that independent farmer, okay? Looking out for that. He feels that tariffs, the banks are really only getting the rich richer and on the backs of the poor man. And that's when he's going to veto the bank charter, and because he feels that the bank is overstepping its bounds. It's using its finance, it's using its influence to elect people to positions of authority in the federal government. It's using its position of backing the state banks with gold and fiddling with the state issuing of paper money. And it's also looking at the states in the sense of hurting the common man, because the common man is relying on basically ready available cash, which we're also going to see is become an issue in the 1890s. And they're hiking interest rates up, and they're making it very hard for the bank or for the common person to borrow money. And a lot of that has to do between the war between Mr. Biddle and Andrew Jackson. But that comes to a head. Jackson believes, again, the constitutionality of the bank. Clearly nothing new. We've seen this in the past. So that debate continues through the Jackson administration. And again, we start to see Jackson promoting this common man in expansionism. And Jackson is an expansionist, and he's an expansionist for the white farmer, okay? And he wants the white farmer to have that economic democracy in moving west and expanding the cotton industry in the South, in the Deep South. And what we're going to see as a result of that, there's already people living in the Deep South, the American Indians. And what we're going to see is that Jackson's going to issue the Indian Removal Act, which is going to look to expel Native Americans and move them west, or they could become citizens of the United States and adapt the white culture, the Anglican culture. And this is the time period where you start to see Indian boarding schools coming about, where the notion was kill the Indians, save the man. Was a very popular slogan that's starting during this time period, the 1830s, or at the start of this, almost like a re-education school for American Indians. And as a result of the Indian Removal Act, you're going to have the actual Cherokee Nation taking the United States government, the government, not the United States government, excuse me, but the government of Georgia, because the Cherokee land had a treaty with the federal government, and they had a section of their nation was in the boundaries of the state of Georgia. And John Marshall, being John Marshall and being an advocate for a strong federal government, basically states that Georgia cannot expel these American Indian groups. They have to respect the treaty that they've signed with the Cherokee. Jackson, the advocate for the common man, the advocate for states' rights, says Marshall made his ruling, now let him defend it. And you're going to have the subsequent Trail of Tears, where it's going to be the forced removal of Native Americans, and as a result of them being extremely poor, extremely malnourished, extremely ill-equipped, many thousands of them are going to die on this awful trail to what is the Oklahoma Territory. So Jackson, again, the advocate for the common man, the holding these vendettas against different groups and different people. And what we're going to see is that debate of Hamilton and Jefferson continue. But the debate on the constitutionality of different acts from Congress, the debate over who should have the power. Who is sovereign? Is it the people in the states, or is the federal government sovereign? So this is Zag's APUSH. Hope you enjoyed this video. We'll catch you next week as we continue through period 4. Have a great day.